My life was shaped by two events: my mother's death giving birth to me, and my father's coldness that followed. He always blamed me for her passing, and that emotional distance made me feel like an outsider in my own home. It was a cold, quiet kind of pain, but a constant one. This feeling of not belonging was made worse by my father's focus on my cousin, a boy named Jake, whose father had died when we were kids. Jake became the son my father wanted. I was shy and academic, a quiet kid who preferred books to sports. Jake, on the other hand, was everything my father hoped for in a son: athletic, charming, and outgoing. He was a natural leader, always surrounded by friends. My father's favoritism was far from subtle. He would praise Jake's achievements on the football field or in social circles, while my own good grades and academic awards were ignored. "Good for you," he'd say with a shrug, then turn back to talking about Jake's latest victory. As we grew older, my father's favoritism became a source of real pain and a major moral dilemma. I knew I couldn't compete with Jake for my father's love, but I also knew I deserved better. I tried to focus on my studies, seeing them as my only way out, my only path to a life where I was valued for who I was. But even that was a struggle. My father's coldness was especially apparent when we started talking about college. I had worked hard all my life, earning top grades and getting accepted into a good university. But my father, who was well off, refused to help me financially. "You're a smart boy," he said. "You'll figure it out." I was shocked and hurt, but I still had hope. I started looking for scholarships and working a part-time job to save money. I was determined to make it work. But then my world came crashing down. One evening, I overheard my father on the phone. "Yes, Jake," he said, his voice warm and proud. "Don't you worry about a thing. I've already set aside the money. I'll pay for all your college fees. You just focus on enjoying your senior year." I froze. He was willing to fund Jake's future, a boy who was not even his son, but he refused to help me. The emotional betrayal was overwhelming. The years of neglect, the constant comparison, it all came down to this: he had made his choice. My father's favoritism wasn't just a part of my past, it was going to destroy my future. At that moment, something inside me broke. I knew I couldn't stay, and I knew I couldn't depend on him for anything ever again. I couldn't stay. The betrayal was too deep, the sting of my father's words too sharp. I packed my bags that night and left home. I cut off all contact with both my father and my cousin, a choice that was both heartbreaking and liberating. The years that followed were a struggle. I worked odd jobs: construction, delivery, bartending, just to survive. I spent nights sleeping in my car, eating cheap food, and constantly worrying about money. While I was struggling, Jake, with my father's money, thrived. He went to the college of his choice, joined a fraternity, and lived the life I could only dream of. Every time I thought about my father's words, a mix of anger and resentment would bubble up inside me. The first few months were the hardest. I felt completely adrift, a stranger in a world that felt alien without the familiar, if painful, comfort of my home. My part-time job at the local diner barely covered my expenses, and the weight of college applications, student loans, and a future that felt impossibly far away was suffocating. I would often sit alone in my car, watching the rain hit the windshield, and wonder if my father ever thought about me, if he ever felt a pang of guilt. I knew, deep down, he didn't. He had Jake. He had his golden child, and I was just an afterthought, a painful reminder of a past he wished he could erase. I tried to keep up with my studies, but it was a losing battle. The stress of working and the emotional toll of my father's betrayal were too much. I had to drop out of college, a decision that broke my heart. All those years of hard work, all those late nights studying, all the sacrifices I had made were for nothing. My father's favoritism wasn't just emotional neglect, it was an act of choice that ruined my chances at a better life. I felt a deep sense of injustice, but I refused to let it consume me. My father's actions had taken away my education, but they wouldn't take away my dignity. I knew I had to find a new path, a new way to succeed, even if it meant doing it all on my own. Dropping out of college was the lowest point of my life. It felt like my father's victory. He had won, and I had lost. But I refused to let that be the end of my story. I channeled my anger and resentment into hard work, using it as fuel to propel me forward. I took on every job I could get, from washing dishes to working in construction. It was grueling, but it taught me the value of hard work and self-reliance. I learned how to save money, how to budget, and how to survive on my own. It was a brutal education, but it was an education nonetheless. My big break came when I found a job at a local bookstore. The owner, an old man named Mr. Henderson, saw something in me that my father never did. He saw my passion for books, my quiet intelligence, and my work ethic. He started me as a stalker, but he quickly promoted me to a manager position. The job wasn't just a paycheck, it was a sanctuary. The smell of old paper and new books, the quiet hum of people browsing, the feeling of being surrounded by stories. It was a comfort I never knew I needed. With a stable income and a supportive environment, I slowly began to rebuild my life. I started taking night classes at a community college, pursuing the degree I had always wanted. It was a slow process, but I was in control. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in the driver's seat. The years of neglect and abuse were still a part of my past, but they no longer defined my future. I also started to build a new family for myself. I surrounded myself with friends who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. They were my support system, my chosen family. They celebrated my small victories and comforted me during my setbacks. I finally felt a sense of belonging, a feeling I had craved my entire life. I was no longer the invisible boy in the corner. I was a valued member of a community. As I was building my new life, I started to hear whispers about my father and Jake. It turned out that my father's blind favoritism and his financial support had not prepared Jake for the real world. Jake, used to getting everything he wanted, had a hard time finding a job after college. He was too used to my father's handouts to be self-reliant. He started to turn to my father for financial support, not just for small things, but for large, extravagant purchases. My father, blinded by his love for his golden child, couldn't say no. The whispers became a roar when I heard that Jake had convinced my father to invest a large sum of money in a failing business. It was an ambitious but poorly planned endeavor that was doomed from the start. My father, who had always been so careful with his money, was swept up in Jake's charisma and charm. He poured all of his life savings into the business, convinced that Jake was a genius who would make them rich. But the business failed, and it failed spectacularly. My father lost everything: his savings, his house, and his car. He was left with a mountain of debt, a broken man who had nothing left to his name. The news reached me through an old friend, and I felt a grim satisfaction. Karma had finally come back to haunt him. His favoritism, his choice to abandon me for Jake, had finally come back to bite him. But I felt no joy in his downfall, just a quiet, cold sense of vindication. I knew that he was now experiencing the same pain and hopelessness that I had felt years ago. He was alone, without a support system, and with no one to turn to. He was drowning, and the only person who could save him was the one he had cast aside. 3 years after I left home, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. My heart started pounding in my chest. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I had to. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky. "Hello? Is this Ethan?" The voice on the other end was familiar, but it sounded different. The usual coldness was gone, replaced by a tone of desperation. "Ethan, please! You have to help me!" My gut told me to hang up, but I stayed on the line. I knew what had happened. My father's favoritism, the thing that had broken our family apart, had finally come back to haunt him. He explained that Jake had convinced him to invest a large sum of money in a failing business. The investment had gone south, leaving my father in a mountain of debt. He had lost his house, his car, and all of his savings. He was drowning, and he had nowhere else to turn. "I need your help," he begged. "I have nothing left. Please, son, just talk to Jake for me. He's not listening." "Why should I?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "You refused to help me when I needed it. You chose Jake over me. Now you have to deal with the consequences of your choices." He started to cry, his voice breaking. "I know I was wrong, Ethan. I was so wrong. I was a fool. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." His apology was too little, too late. It couldn't erase years of neglect, the pain of being abandoned, the memory of him choosing Jake over me. I hung up the phone. I felt relieved for the first time in my life after standing up for myself. I had finally said no. It's been a year since that phone call. My father's favoritism may have shaped my past, but it no longer defines my future. I'm focused on my own growth and the relationships I've built with people who value me for who I am. I've come to realize that my father's actions, while hurtful, ultimately led me to find my own strength and build a life that is truly mine. I am now a manager at the bookstore, I'm almost done with my degree, and I have a wonderful circle of friends who I consider my true family. I'm happy. I've finally reached out to my cousin, Jake. He apologized for his part in everything, and we've started to mend our relationship. He told me that my father is living in a small apartment, working a part-time job to pay off his debts. Jake is living with him, still unemployed, and still blaming me for his problems. They both lost everything because of their own actions. I've accepted that the past can't be changed, but I can control my future. I'm building a new life for myself, a life filled with love, laughter, and people who truly care about me. I'm forging my own path, confident in the strength I've gained through years of self-reliance, and for the first time in my life, I am truly at peace.